let's look at this article by Life Science, what they say about DNA tests. Now, this video is going to be about the accuracy between DNA tests and genealogy. Okay, genetic ancestry tests mostly hype, scientists say. Than, published on October 18th, 2007. It says several companies now claim that for as little as $100 in a swab of the inner cheek, they can reveal a person's family tree and ancestral homeland. But more than a dozen scientists from various backgrounds say such recreational genetics or vanity tests have significant scientific limitations and rely on misconceptions about race and genetics. It says if a test taker is just interested in finding out where there are some people in the world that share the same DNA as them, then these tests can certainly tell them that, said Deborah Balnick of the University of Texas in Austin. But they're not going to tell you every place or every group in the world where people share your DNA, nor will they necessarily be able to tell you exactly where your ancestors lived or what race or social group they identified with. Balnick and the other researchers expressed present their analysis in the October 19th issue of the journal Science, a popular trend. More than 460,000 people have purchased genetic ancestry tests in the past 6 years, according to a recent study. That trend is likely to increase, scientists say, fueled by the hype promises from companies selling the tests and by news stories about test takers such as Oprah Winfrey learning she is Zulu, which is unbelievable because the Zulus wasn't even taken here to America. And the Zulus are in South Africa, where they claim that they stolen the African slaves from West Africa. So you know that's totally ridiculous. It says, or a Floridian accountant being told he was descended from the Mongolian warlord Genghis Khan. Now, you know that has to be a dang on fairy tale. Like, really? It says, but such results are beyond the capabilities of current tests, scientists say. In the Genghis Khan example, the company that preferred the test, Oxford Genetics, did not have DNA samples from the Mongol warlord himself because his tomb has never been found. Instead, the company found that the accountant had a set of genetic markers very common in people from Eurasia. As we know, Eurasia is what they used to call, what they now want to say are two continents, which is Europe and Asia, but it's one continent. Anyways, it says, in particularly in these areas where Genghis Khan conquered, the rest was inference, meaning it was a guess. You know, they just lied, in other words. It says there's nothing to actually tie it to him, Balnick said. It could have been some other guy alive at the time who slept around a lot. Hype promises. Most genetic ancestry tests involve the analysis of small snippets of DNA passed down only through the mother or only through the father. These tests can identify related individuals who share a common matrilineal or patrilineal ancestor, or even where in the world people with your genetic signature live today. A common misconception about genetic ancestry testing is that it can reveal information about an individual's ancestry. It cannot. And let's look at that again. They said that the information cannot reveal a person's ancestry. It says people assume these tests can tell you your race or ethnicity and reveal exactly where your ancestors lived or exactly what social group they identify with, she said. Recently, the website Ancestry.com rolled out a new service that allows people to mail in DNA samples to see if they have quote-unquote genetic cousins in the company's database and reveal their ancient origins. One problem with this approach, scientists say, is that because such tests analyze less than 1% of a person's genome, they will miss most of a person's relatives. If you take a mitochondrial DNA test, you learn something about your mother's 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 lineage. If you go back 10 generations, that's telling you something about only one out of more than 1,000 ancestors. Such tests cannot account for recent migrations of peoples from their ancient homelands. Present-day patterns of residence are rarely identical to what existed in the past, and social groups have changed over time in name and composition. Baltnick and the colleagues encourage professional genetic and anthropological associations to issue policy statements about genetic testing that urge either caution on the part of the consumers or set limits on the claims companies can make. Personally, I would like to see more independent source of information about these tests so consumers can go somewhere besides the companies themselves and get information about what the tests can and cannot tell them. I'm going to take you to my other channel, Kelly Sex Stories. And so before I had established Rojo Chief, I was doing this one, and this one is about sex, relationships, and celebrity gossip. But I did a few videos talking about the American Indians on here. Okay. And also talking about DNA and stuff like that. So I have to find the video. This is in my playlist. And we're going to look at this one. Henry Louis Gates is a fraud. My DNA results. Now, I did this video prior to me knowing the information that I know now. So I may fast forward through this, and I'll put the link below so you guys can check out this video, and you can also check out the other video since it's in the playlist. And here we go. Hey guys, this is Kelly of Kelly Sex Stories, and I will be talking to you about my ancestry and about the results of my DNA test from Ancestry.DNA.Com. And what you will see here on this picture will be the definition of trace regions from their website. This is the estimate of my African heritage. This is the estimate of my European heritage. This is the estimate of my West Asian heritage. This is the estimate of my Central Asian heritage. On this picture, you will see the estimate of my Native American heritage. Now, I'm going to pause it right there. And as you see below, I said it was published on November 25th, 2016. And it says this video is about the lies that Dr. Henry Louis Gates is telling our people about our heritage and legacy. And then, so like right here, I'm going to click on this article. And it's by the Smithsonian magazine. And it says a history of slavery and genocide is hidden in modern DNA. It says genetic testing of people with Caribbean ancestry reveals evidence of indigenous population collapse and Pacific waves of slave trade. And this was published on November 15th, 2013. And it says there are plenty of ways to study history. You can conduct archaeological digs. It says archaeological digs examining the artifacts and structures buried under the ground to learn about past lifestyles. You can read historical texts, perusing the written record to better understand events that occurred long ago. Now I'm going to skip down, and it's talking about hidden in the microscopic genetic material of people from the Caribbean. They found is an indelible record of human history stretching back to the centuries, to the arrival of the Europeans, the decimation of Native American populations, and the transatlantic slave trade. Now, we know when they say the transatlantic slave trade, they're talking about African people that was brought over here, and they're talking about decimation. And we know that the people was not destroyed, by smallpox, but that's what they're referring to when they're talking about Native American populations. And let's see where they were looking at people's DNA. They said that they looked at 251 people living in Florida who had ancestry from one of the 6 countries and islands that border the Caribbean: Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Honduras, and Colombia. It says along with 79 residents of Venezuela who belong to one of the 3 Native American groups, the Yucapa, the Waro, and the Bari. And it says each study participant was part of a triad that included 2 parents and one of their children who were surveyed. Okay, so it says analyzing their entire genomes in the search of particular genetic sequences called single nucleotide polymorphisms. So we know that that's not true, because we know that they said that they only can account for less than 1% of your genetic code anyways. And it says tracing a person's DNA to a geographical area is relatively straightforward. It isn't, because in the other article they said that they don't know where you came from by looking at your genetic code. They can't say that you're from a particular region or area. They don't know what your race is, and they can't tell what your ethnic background is either, according to it. So anyway, they go on to say, but one of the most amazing things about the state of modern genetics is that it also allows scientists to draw chronological conclusions about human migration, because blocks of these SNPs shorten over time at a generally consistent rate. You can essentially break the genome up into European chunks, Native American chunks, and African chunks. If each of these regions are longer, it suggests they arrived in the gene pool most recently, because time tends to break up the genome. If the chunks are shorter, it suggests there's a lot of recombination and mixing up of the genome, which suggests the events were longer ago. Okay, so that's what they're saying there about that. So then I'm skipping down. Then it says the genetic analysis can also look at genes that are particularly passed down on the X chromosome in particular, which we know the X chromosome is given to you by your mother. And it says revealing the historical influence of different ancestries on both the female and male sides of the genome. They found that in the population study, Native American SNPs were more prevalent on the X chromosome than the others, reflecting the history of both marriage and rape of Native American women by Spanish men who settled in the area. Okay, so we're just going to leave that there. And then I'm going to go on to looking at a video by Kimberly Purpose, where she talks about genealogy and how to do your genealogy.
It'll spark a light bulb, or you have an aha moment as to exactly what they were telling you. It may not make sense at that particular time, but when you do your research, you start to realize, hey, this is very important information. But anyway, I can go on and on about that. But like I said that's very important, is listening to your elders, getting names and everything. I just wanted to mention that. But this article is called Tracing Your African American Ancestors, and this is by Leslie Hubbard. I thought this was a really good article, and it's very short and straight to the point, which I think is great. I'm going to put a link to this article, and she gives some tips on what you can do to trace your ancestors as well. Like I said, number 1 is talking to your elders, getting stories, getting names. Those are very important. But this article goes on and says, since February is Black History Month, it is a great time to look at some of the resources available to trace African American ancestors.
Let it flow! Well, there's a brand new show on Sunday night from some talented folks, so you know it's all right. Now the heart.
And if you have African American ancestors, it's a great time to start finding them. Particularly as you work through the Civil War and in the early periods, locating African American roots can be challenging. The good news is that there are some fabulous resources that are becoming more essential all the time. Post through 1870s research. If you're tracing African American ancestors in records after 1870, your research path looks similar to the research path of any U.S.-based family line. To To begin this research, start with yourself and your immediate family and work back using standard U.S. records, such as censuses and vital and land records. You can use Family Search Online U.S. Research Guide, which includes a clickable map of the United States that directs you to research information for each state. I thought this was quite interesting. I didn't get a chance to check this out, but I'm going to click on it later. I just want to go through this article. I think that, that would be excellent if that does take you to some more resources. But let's continue. The transitional periods. For many people tracing African American roots, the periods during and right after the Civil War is key to research. In 1860, there are nearly 4 million enslaved individuals living in the United States, representing just under 13% of the population. They were considered property and were not included by names in most records before the emancipation in 1863. By following your ancestors closely to the records back through the Civil War and the aftermath, you can often see clues that leads to finding them in earlier records. And that's true, but I also want to point it out. I did another video about the Indian Wars. I believe it was the Creek Wars. You might want to check it out. There's the correlation between Indian Wars. What I was saying is, this article failed to also mention that African Americans, the Aborigines, aka African Americans, are indigenous. A lot of them are, most of us are indigenous here and are Aborigines. And so the Indian War is when a lot of the tribes fought against the U.S., against the military, and to try to fight and keep their land. And so I was thinking too, if you can look back at the Indian Wars and see when they took place and happened, there might be a correlation between the Indian Wars and when your ancestors were put into slavery and the dates. That might be a way you can some kind of way trace which tribe your family member came from. That's if they were captured during that particular time that the war took place. I might be totally off, but I was just thinking maybe sometimes with the wars, I like how they mentioned the Civil War. Sometimes you can trace through the wars. And also, I would think also the Indian Wars, because a lot of the Indians were being captured and thrown into slavery. You can be able to trace your roots that way too, and maybe stumble across a tribe perhaps. But I think this is really great information right here. And also checking the property records is another great way to see if you can find anything about your ancestors. But let's continue. It says, in addition to the enslaved individuals in 1860, there were also 476,000 free colored persons living in the United States. Like I said, these free colored peoples are Aborigines. They were Indians, more than likely. If your family fell into the category, they should be included by name in many more records. See? That's another thing you need to check into. Often, a key for success to finding your ancestors in records before this transitional period is to locate the names of those who own your enslaved ancestors. Knowing owners' names can focus on your search on specific records of that family, which can also include information about your family. Here are some records to look for in important periods that can help you understand your ancestors' lives and possibly help you locate the names of their owners, so you can push their lines back further. See? I think this is quite interesting. See, they give you some more sources where you can look. It says here, the 1870 U.S. Census. You can get the U.S. Census online. And I think it goes further back. You can either go further back in the 1700s. You might can find some information as well. That might pinpoint your ancestors. Another one is the 1867 voter registry. Another one is the Freedmen's Bureau and Freedmen's Bank records. That's very important. People need to look into that. And the records of United States colored troops, USCT, in the Civil Wars. Wow, that's interesting too. I never thought of that. And they have links here, which is awesome. With the Freedmen's Bank, you can see if any of your relatives are listed there. I think Dane Calloway mentions this as well in his in one of his videos, several of his videos about the Freedmen's Bureau and the Freedmen's Bank records. Very important information. And then, of course, they go into before the war. It says here, before attempted research earlier than the Civil War, make sure you have gleaned all details that you can from the transitional records. Tracing enslaved ancestors prior to the Civil War often requires you to explore new types of records. Census records, which theoretically moves from only including head of households in the 1840s to including every name starting in 1850. Oh, okay. So they used to only put the head of household before then. That's some critical information to know. Did not record names of those enslaved. Wow. It says in 1840s include every name starting in 1850. Did not include names of those enslaved, so they didn't include the slaves. Wow. Even slave schedules kept with the 1850s and 1860s census typically only include information on enslaved individuals by gender and age, although there are a few exceptions. And it says, see how I decoded records for more information. So here it is. This is more resources right here. I didn't click on it, but some more articles. This website is a wealth of information. Has different links here that has more articles, more resources that you can look into to get more information about tracing your roots. And it says here, when searching for information prior to the Civil War, your ancestors.
Red Lobster's Endless Shrimp is back for just $15.99. Yes! New cornflake crusted sriracha honey.
Will typically be linked with information on their owners. If they were enslaved records from this time period, there are likely a list information about slaves included. And these are the things that's included in these records. Wills and probable records of slave owners, okay, deed records, plantation records, other local records, okay, and I think the other local records is some areas name of enslaved individuals included in other records such as tax records, vital records. These records vary by time and place. Okay, for more details, on finding and using the records, see Family Search. And so they go into it. They got a little guide here as well. I'm not sure you have to pay for it or not, but it's a little guide here that you can go to give you more information. This is a treasure trove, and they got even more resources here. It says the National Archives. It says the National Archives African American Search. They got the Family Tree Magazine and Family Search link right down here below. So y'all may want to check this out to help with your family research. I'm going to definitely check it out. I just stumbled across this page. It was published on January 30th, 2017. So it was published last year. And so this is very interesting. I think this can definitely get you started in the right direction.
Okay, so guys, this is what it says about one of my ancestors. It says Louis McAlpin. He was born in 1815. And it says his birth was in Alabama around the time of 1815. It says Creek War. It says when the Creek Indian Nation went to war in 1813, Louis McAlpin lived in their territory. He was 4 years old when Alabama became a state. It says in 1819, Louis McAlpin was living in Alabama around the time the territorial land was admitted as a state. Okay, and then my sources is the 1880 United States Federal Census. Okay, so I'm going to leave that right there. I'm going to look at this right here where it says community. underneath DNA origins, right? Because this is where the area where my mama came from, Virginia, and her ancestors were in Virginia and North Carolina. So anyways, it says here, it says you and all the members of this community are linked through shared ancestors. You probably have family who lived in this area for years and maybe still do. Use the timeline to explore what their life may have been like. Then it says, and as we know, this is a hijack. This is something that they always try to say, but we already know that a lot of people weren't brought to the state of Virginia as African slaves, but instead there was a lot of enslaved American Indians that was there in the state of Virginia. But anyways, it says most African Americans in this community, and we know they're not African Americans, we know they're American Indians. It says can trace their ancestry back to West Africa, and we know that's not true. It says the Republic of Cameroon, the Republic of the Congo, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Benin, Togo, over 200-year period, were enslaved and brought to Virginia to work on the tobacco farms. Now, we know that the tobacco farms were an American Indian crop. So now they're trying to tie the African people to tobacco, and we know that's not the case. We know that was the Indians that was in Virginia, and one of them were the Powhatan Confederacy. Okay. Anyway, it says life for both free and enslaved Black Virginians grew more difficult as race-based laws imposed new restrictions. Black Virginians, as we know, Black Virginians are really American Indians, but also Black was also put on American Indians and Africans. It says responded to rebellions and cultural innovations. As anyways, it says although the 17th century free Black Virginians, it says although 17th century free Black Virginians could vote and own property. Now, what in the world? That doesn't make any sense. How in the world can a person be of African ancestry? Where they do that at? You know, when's the last time that they said in school that African people was able to own property? Not any time, because they said that those people were slaves. But now they're up here telling you that in the 17th century you had so-called Black Virginians who owned property, and it also said that that they could vote. And it says once the tobacco industry and later cotton boom, slavery became enshrined in American society. So, to me, in other words, what they letting you know right there, and it says the period of 1700, 1725. So they're trying to cover up the fact of what the autochthonous one said, is that there were American Indians that were growing tobacco, and they were shipping that tobacco from Virginia to England, okay? And it also goes to show about the cotton industry, what Kerry Davis has said of African Americans ain't African, that our people was controlling that. Now you see how they said Black Virginians, they could vote, own property, and this is between the 1700s. So they want to make you believe that these people are Africans when they were not. Anyways, it says slavery became enshrined in American society. Plantation owners in both Virginia and Maryland wanted to, in an inexpensive way, to cultivate the labor-intensive crop, and both colonies became reliant on slave labor. It says the options to buy or earn one's freedom largely disappeared. In 1710, most slaves in Virginia had been born in Africa, and it says and arrived on slave ships. And we know that's not true, because the people who was originally enslaved were American Indians, and especially in the 1700s and at the beginning of the 18th century, we know this. Okay, and then prior to in the 1600s, which is the 17th century, and the 15th century, which is the 1400s, those were American Indians that were enslaved. Anyways, it says white communities became more suspicious of Virginia's free Black population, and laws limiting their freedom forced them into poverty and others out of the state altogether. It says 1725, 1750, a language of their own. While most enslaved Blacks in the colonies lived in rural areas and worked on farms, those in larger cities such as Philadelphia, one of the region's main ports, labored as craftsmen and domestic servants. For those who worked closely together, finding ways to communicate was essential. And then it says here, new forms of communication. It says African traditions and uniquely American traditions, and some music traditions became roots of today's blues, jazz, and gospel. Lies. because, first of all, when you listen to the music of blues, jazz, and gospel, it doesn't have any African sound to it. It's totally unique from people that's from West Africa. Like the way that we do our beats, the way that we sound, the way that we sing is totally different. So that's how you know that that's a hijack. That's just a straight up lie that Ancestry is saying. And that's the reason why they should be sued for writing this type of BS. Anyways, it says 1750, 1775, comfort and resistance through spirituality. Spirituality was an important cultural practice among enslaved Virginians, and the first black church in North America was founded during this period on a plantation in Mecklenburg County. Owners were wary of literacy among those that were enslaved. So then we'll skip down. Then it says American Revolutionary War organized Britain's first regiment of black soldiers, offering freedom to any slave who would fight for the British crown. Enslaved blacks comprised of 20% of the population of the 13 colonies. It says many did not gain their freedom, were forced to move south with slave owners into the Carolinas, where the cotton industry were expanding following the invention of the cotton gin in 1793. Then it says in the 19th century, this community was split in three. Many remained in Virginia, others were taken west with settlers pouring into Tennessee and Kentucky. And then it says, skipping down, it says further and further south as cotton planters moved onto Indian lands in Georgia and Alabama as they were open to white settlement. So what they're trying to get you to believe is that the only reason why your ancestors were on Indian territory, like they said, my great-great-grandfather was on Indian territory, they trying to make you believe that, oh, this was a person that happened to be a free person of color by the census, listed on the census as he was listed as a mulatto on the census. But they're trying to make you believe that when you see an ancestor on Indian territory, that that's an African person that was brought by a white slave owner, where that is further from the truth. That is very far from the truth completely. So all of this crap is nothing but lies and propaganda. Okay? Because anytime you see a person that's on the census, that's a free person. And if you're free and you're listed as Negro, your ancestor was listed as a Negro or colored, or Negro, colored, mulatto, black, if they were listed as any of those things, and sometimes white, then more than likely that means your ancestor was an Indian, not an African, because we already know that African people were considered as chattel slaves, and chattel slaves were not able to own any property because they were considered as property. So I hope that you like this video, share this video, and tell me what do you think below. I'm out.